Hello, this is Trip, and you are listening to the Homebrewed Christianity Podcast, where we bring you some audiological ingredients to brew your own zesty, tasty faith. And today, my guest is Charles Marsh, and we're talking about one, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Boom. Yeah, Bonhoeffer on the podcast, and Dr. Marsh is a professor at the University of Virginia's Religion Department. He is the head guru of the Project for Lived Theology. He is a Bonhoeffer scholar. This is his second book on Bonhoeffer, and this one is an over 500-page biography. One that when I got it, I couldn't put it down and managed to get through the whole stinking thing in slow, enjoy-yourself pace in like 2.5 days. In the middle of it, I tweeted about how much fun I was having reading this book, and it turns out Dr. Marsh and I have some mutual friends. So thank you to Kyle and Jeff Pugh for connecting us, and he's on the podcast. We had way too much fun, and he's going to have to come back on because we may have talked over an hour, but there's still plenty material for us to keep going on. Head on over to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast page. Check out all the links to what Dr. Marsh is up to. You can click through and get his text, this book. There's also an audio version of it, too. You're welcome for giving you that heads up. And most of all, I would love to connect with you because, honestly, Bo and I love doing this podcast so much. It's always great to hear from people that enjoy it, that appreciate it. So you can click the speak pipe button there on the side, leave us a message, maybe a question, a topic, a suggestion of sorts, or you can leave a comment. Most of all, we want you to share the brew. So tweet it, Facebook it, and maybe you could do this for me. Leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you get the book because it really is that good. And think about joining Bo and I this summer for our online class, our high-gravity summer school class, where we explore living options in Christian theology. You can find out information for that by just heading over to homebrewedchristianity.com. Click around, you'll see info about it, and you can sign up. Remember that if you are a member of the Homebrewed Christianity community as an elder or as a bishop, then you don't have to pay to join the class. You'll be getting an email soon with all the information necessary to join this online theological excitement this summer. All right, there we go. Are you ready? I hope so. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Trip, and today I get to talk to Charles Marsh about his brand new biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah. Charles Marsh wrote a new biography of Bonhoeffer entitled Strange Glory, and I finished it last week. I tweeted about how much I enjoyed it, and it turns out that we have multiple mutual friends who all sent me your email address and said you really have to have him on the podcast. So I'm very excited to have you here to talk about your book, the process of getting there, the project you do on Lived Theology, and talk to anyone who, like me, has this ongoing relationship with Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Well, thank you, Trip, for the invitation, and it's a delight talking with you and learning more about Homebrewed, which is just a terrific outfit that you've set up. And I, look forward to future exchanges and collaborations and whatever. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Oh, I'm glad. So this book won Christianity Today's book award for history and biography, and I'm a Bonhoeffer fan. Like every Christmas, I used to read Cost of Discipleship over and over again. Then I expanded it and have read most of the major works, and then I started reading biographies. And in yours, I think like is my new favorite. So,
thank you.
So I just want to know, how did Charles Marsh become so attached to Bonhoeffer that you would spend the years necessary to write such an engaging and also informed biography?
That's a really great question. I owe a huge debt to Bonhoeffer as a graduate student in the theory-saturated 1980s. I turned to Bonhoeffer late in my studies as a way of escape from the kind of postmodernist gulags that were fairly well entrenched by the late 80s. Bonhoeffer illuminated for me a way back to life, and you should know that that there had been sort of conflicts brewing throughout my doctoral studies between my academic habitation and commitments and my social engagements. I spent every summer in the 1980s in Atlanta, where my family lives, working in an inner city community development project run by an ecumenical organization, working with low-income children, teaching Bible study, basketball, poetry, and really working with the same group of, say, 18 or 20 young men over a 5 or 6 year period. And then, at the end of the summer, I would come back to the university, and I loved that. I am absolutely exhilarated by ideas and intellectual exchange, and yet the world of the inner city and the world of concrete human need felt a long way away, and it was a really difficult it was a difficult kind of conflict to negotiate, and living between these two worlds. And I'd grown up in an evangelical family. My father's a minister. I'd heard stories of the great Bonhoeffer martyr and resistance hero, in pulpits. I, in fact, hadn't read a lot of Bonhoeffer. But it was the discovery of his early writings as a young philosophical theologian, 1927 to 1933, his first two dissertations, his first dissertation written at the ripe old age of 21, and then the second turned in around his 24th birthday. When Bonhoeffer was grappling with many of the same kind of philosophical, theological conflicts inherited from the German Protestant liberal tradition. And Bonhoeffer, both in these writings, but of course in his witness and in the shape of his prose and the accessibility and vividness of his thought, illuminated for me a way back to life, and not, I said a way of escape earlier, but what I meant was a way of forging a deeper unity between the academic and the practical aspirations that had been really driving me. And so I finished the dissertation and wrote a first book on all of that, those early philosophical writings. My thoughts shortly thereafter turned back to my childhood in the Deep South, and in this sort of interesting journey without maps, I found myself thinking theologically and writing theologically about race and civil rights. What I thought would be one book turned into 4 books. But it helped me kind of figure out also how to write narrative nonfiction, or if I may, to write theology as story. Yeah. And it seemed to me that the challenge that awaited me I don't know, a decade ago, when I began pondering a biographical work on Bonhoeffer, was sort of bringing together these two streams of my own creative life, sort of writing theology in a kind of narrative style and storytelling from these untapped reservoirs of if I may, lived theology, and that's really the I apologize, but sort of a lengthy, meandering way of getting at your question.
Well, one of the things I think that you bring out in the text, and also that makes Bonhoeffer different than plenty of other 20th century theologians, and David Ford mentions it in The Future of Christian Theology, is that Bonhoeffer used multiple different styles of writing to communicate his theology. I mean, you talked about finding his early dissertations and going, oh, wow, now this is the kind of philosophical understructure of these texts for, that are like these imperative declarations for Christian discipleship, or these idealist prophetic models of Christian community. Or then you have, on the other hand, like these beautiful poems he writes in letters and papers, and his actual careful crafted letters, like the letter describing the blessing he wanted to give to his kin on their baptism, or he does these like poems responding to hearing the bells of the churches ringing at certain times of the liturgical season, and his life is full of music and the arts, and he responds in ways he could not imagine to the beauty of creation. Like when he leaves Germany and visits Spain, he responds to the colors and richness of the Catholic tradition in ways that his kind of inner Luther really wasn't prepared for.
Right.
Like, to me, the thing about Bonhoeffer is how many different senses, in a sense, he spoke with and also received with as a theologian.
Yeah, I think that's precisely his genius, and you've offered an account of that's very eloquent. I, on that point, wanted to not only reconstruct, narrate this courageous, capacious, synthetic, imaginative, boundary-crossing theologian and his originality in the canon, but I also wanted to show Bonhoeffer as one of the most innovative intellectual thinkers of the modern period, who ought to be measured not only, alongside Barth and Tillich and Brunner and other theologians of that milieu, but alongside Thomas Mann or Schoenberg in music, or Max Beckmann in painting. I mean, his achievement is monumental. You can look at letters and papers from prison and see there the full, dazzling range of his literary skills. This is a favorite book of mine, but it's written as a kind of epistolary novel, but it's filled with poems and songs transcribed. It's filled with fragments that kind of flash with illuminations that weren't finally developed, because he was writing really towards his imminent death. He's writing plays and short stories. There's fragments of novel that he was working on in prison, and I think that's all part of his understanding of discipleship as the way to consummate humanness, but also at the same time and precisely because of the call of Jesus, it's the way to a kind of heightened and highly textured kind of imaginative response to the world. And Bonhoeffer's journey is one of being unafraid of barriers and boundaries that that limit, that constrain the Christian from living into her or his full humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really reminds me of one of my favorite passages in Letters and Papers, and I was going to bring it up later, but I'll go ahead and read it just because I love it. In Letters and Papers, he's describing kind of the other side of his, the image of religionless Christianity that radical theologians pick up and they love, but he also has this other side of the image, and he says, Christianity, on the other hand, puts us into many different dimensions of life at the same time. In a way, we accommodate God and the whole world within us. Life isn't pushed back into a single dimension, but is kept in multi-dimensional polyphonic sound. This image of like this richness of existence there, and it's the place in which we hold God and the world within us at the same time. That is such a deep image. I think it gets at the way Bonhoeffer saw both the depths of creation and also God's presence in it. And it gives this richness where if you see life the way he describes it there in a cell facing his impending death, it makes sense why kind of initial responses to those first two chapters in Cost of Discipleship probably shouldn't be heard as this like overbearing, aggressive tome, like, cheap grace, blah, 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 but you need a costly grace, this overbearing, overburdened demand. No, like when you see life in this deep, rich way, then you can't help but respond in love with this radical nature of discipleship.
That's right. No, I think you're absolutely right, and the passage you read is brilliant and blows me away every time I hear it. And even though I've heard it and read it many, many times, it always invites a fresh kind of consideration. So what he's discovered in these ruminations in prison is a beautiful sort of analogy between musical polyphony and Christian existence. His friend Eberhard Bethge had introduced him to the music of a composer named Heinrich Schütz, who was one of the great composers of church music after Bach. And
one of the things you do in the book that's so much fun is you make their friendship rich and alive, and so human. Yeah. And like Bonhoeffer doesn't know if he wants to really fall in love with this redneck friend of his music. It's not highbrow, upper class German aristocracy symphonies.
That's right. But he's so enamored by this music and by the polyphony of its style that one day he writes this gorgeous meditation and suggests that this is a terrific way of imagining Christian existence. Polyphony is a musical style in which there is a fixed point, a center, a cantus firmus that doesn't change and that holds true, while the musical expressions, the tonal expressions, can reach new and unfamiliar extremes. And so it's this kind of way of talking about Christ as center enables human beings who are following him, who are living in his image, to taste the depth, the richness, the beauty of consummate worldliness. He speaks of Christians drinking the worldly cup to the dregs, but it's unbecoming of Christians, he would say, to think so much about the afterlife that this world becomes kind of a shadow realm. He said, in fact, until the Christian learns to drink the worldly cup to the dregs, he or she has no business thinking about the life hereafter. And so it's an extraordinary moment, a discovery that I think also corrects, if you will, some of the imbalances of the cost of discipleship, some of the strenuous, individual, heroic kind of tensions of that book. And in fact, in prison, Bonhoeffer said in sort of a passing remark, but it's just an extraordinary acknowledgement that he looks back on cost of discipleship with some worry about the way in which discipleship in that book becomes so much about the individual listening to the call of Christ, retreating from the world or breaking from the world or moving into some kind of strenuous, heroic pursuit of holiness. And Bonhoeffer said, look, I understand why I wrote that book at the time. That kind of emphatic description of the call of Christ as against all other powers and principalities was what needed to be said in these early years of the Hitler regime, when most church people are confusing the voice of the Fuhrer with the voice of God. But it's nonetheless the case that, Bonhoeffer, through these discoveries of Catholic natural theology and his love of sacraments and his genuine openness to the fullness of God in Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy that tempers the kind of severity and austerity of tone that one finds in Cost of Discipleship. And I know that book is read often, by Christian study groups and, by church groups and whatever as, a kind of manual, but it needs to be read in the context of these other, and I think more incarnational writings.
One of the things that you communicated really well in the book, I think, is how Bonhoeffer could make that criticism of his past, but he also was grateful for the whole journey that brought him to a place where he's in prison, right?
That's right.
So one of the things that you do so well is it's rare that a theologian lapses into being human, right? If you read theology, it takes being a theologian to recognize humanity when a theologian's talking. Only if you're a theologian do you think to yourself that when you read the third version of Hegel's explanation of the different types of religion in his lectures on the philosophy of religion. Like, only a theologian reads that and goes, he's trying to wrestle with the performative nature of Eastern religions, and yet they have this ontology underneath it that he's attracted to, and he doesn't know what to make of it, so they shift places in it. And you read that and you're like, I love the fact that Hegel's, wrestling with this. Unless you're a theologian, you read that and go, oh my God, what is this? Right? Like, and Bonhoeffer, in your telling, becomes alive so that he's like a human, a Christian, and a theologian. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about what we were just talking about is how at the end of this journey, when he's looking back and you're talking about this kind of multi-dimensional layer of reality and life and existence, and how you talked about Christ being the center, but he also has this line in Letters and Papers that is much that connects with that, where he says that God is beyond, in the midst of our lives. Yeah. Could you say something about how he came to have this radical Christocentrism and this radical embrace of material existence?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it also points us to these related themes of religionless Christianity and world come of age, and admonitions to live before God and with God as if there were no God. The notion that Jesus and the experience of Jesus is to encounter the transcendent in the other, in the relationality of social existence. And I think that one of the ways I would encourage readers to make their way through Letters and Papers is to let these kind of disparate themes just be as they appear, without the rush or a sense of needing to always discern or claim the deeper theological unity. That said, there's no doubt that Letters and Papers is premised on a thoroughgoing Christocentric, Christocratic, Christomorphic imagination. Mm-hmm. And in that journey that Bonhoeffer calls the turning from the phraseological to the real, being in Christ is a path towards, as I've said earlier, a consummate humanness. It is a way of seeing the real history of the world amidst the ruins and the chaos and the violence. It's not a triumphalism. It's not a resignation, but it's a cruciform, Christocratic, retrieval of really a patristic theme of recapitulation, of anakephaliosis, of the idea that, as one finds in Irenaeus, who Bonhoeffer is citing in prison, that before the Christ event, existence being was slowly and inevitably receding into nothingness. That Christ repristinated the world and, in a sense, reinvigorated the ontological nature of things. And it's with that kind of, sense of joy and delight and gratitude and humility that I think Bonhoeffer is able to so courageously explore all of these kinds of sometimes seemingly unrelated or contradictory themes and notions and experiences and letters from papers from prison.
Yeah, I think one way of putting it, I can't remember exactly how you said it in the book, but that, like in his retrieval, there are like many different Bonhoeffers. There's like the Anabaptist pacifist Bonhoeffer. There's the Christian atheist proto-radical theologian Bonhoeffer. There's the radical Lutheran Bonhoeffer. Like there's so many different versions that we have. And people want to claim him, obviously, because his biography connects to his theology in ways that not only kind of reveal this the brokenness of the 20th century's experience, but also like someone who stared it straight in the face and kept trying to confess their faith.
That's right.
I wonder what. When you're like reading all these different versions of Bonhoeffer, or in my favorite, even if it's wrong, is Eberhard Jungel's, where he argues that these kinds of themes are there because the moment our concept of God is no longer necessary to sustain existence, society, ethics, and things, finally we can hear the gospel because God is more than necessary. The good news is a gift that comes to us and reveals the world to have been differently than we knew it before. Like there's like a retroactive recognition of sin, of old creation, this kind of thing. But it's not like the gospel or God's necessary for the world. And it's when it's no longer necessary, where God's more than necessary, that God can actually be defined by God's word and self-testimony in Christ. I mean,
I think.
But how do you see those different images of Bonhoeffer playing out?
Well, it's a really good question. I very much admire Jungel's take on Bonhoeffer and God is the Mystery of the World, which I think is the book that you're referring to.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the books that changed my life in many ways.
It's an extraordinary book. What's missing from Jungel's retrieval is the ethical and the relational and the practical dimension, and so Bonhoeffer in this wonderful kind of axiom, if you will, it's almost like a hermeneutical kind of rule that seems to accompany everything he writes and says and does. After he returns from his first trip to America in 1931, he has come to America. If I may just say a word about this for a moment, really just as another chapter in his exceedingly charmed life. He's 25 years old, or about to be 25. He has 2 doctorates under his belt. He is, a straight-laced academic who is embarked on academic, fame and fortune in the demanding world of German academe. He doesn't think there's anything to learn from the Americans. In fact, he has this notion, and he may be right, that American Protestantism, at least as observed, in 1930, is really no different than philosophical pragmatism. It's just about constructing the God you want and need and helps you get the stuff that makes you feel good, and that the Americans, he said, design their image of God the way someone might order an automobile from the factory in Detroit. You pick your color and you pick your style and whatever.
Didn't he use a phrase like Protestantism in America is like being a Protestant without a Reformation?
Yeah, this is an interesting essay. It's an amazing essay. It's a short piece that he wrote after his second and final visit to the United States in 1939. But that essay is extraordinary because he says, what really defines American Protestant hegemony in its sort of white dominant form is a sense of profound entitlement and a lack of clarity, in fact, an utter confusion on the Reformation themes of trust in the Word and trusting in God's promises to bless. And he adds to this his observation that the reason for the kind of American Protestant sort of theological practice of thinking that you can have Jesus in everything else, and moreover, Jesus will actually help you get all the stuff that you want, is that we have never endured a Reformation, a historical moment, a historical crisis during which we as Christians had to risk everything on the truthfulness of the Word of God. Now, he would have also said that sense of Reformation moment was very much a part of the African American Christian tradition, and that the African American story really existed as the one compelling counter narrative to the dominant, kind of American story of domination and exceptionalism. So he says we're a country that has never experienced a Reformation moment. But back to that trip in 3031, it's just a fascinating year.
Oh yeah,
and really against his better instincts, he undergoes a profound transformation, and it's not only in exchanges with Reinhold Niebuhr and other sort of great American social theologians who were clustering around a union in New York City, but it was also through friendships formed with classmates who would leave union and go into or organizing work or and labor in sort of creating intentional communities and agricultural cooperatives and setting up kind of freedom schools, and really the generation that preceded the civil rights movement of the 1950s. But it was finally in his encounters and 6-month immersion in the African American church that led Bonhoeffer to say, I have finally heard the voice of Jesus in the Church of the Outcast of America, and to say that through this encounter with the eruptive, sorrowful joy of the Black Christ, he had found a way in his return to Germany to make this turning from the phraseological to the real. That's the phrase that I began this sort of digression on. This turning from the phraseological to the real becomes a kind of interpretive rule. It's in any case, a compulsion, a conviction that forms his entire kind of Christian imagination. And it's not to say that there is, there ought to be some kind of a linear, once and for all move away from the phraseological or the academic or the theoretical or the theological or the scholarly to, a practical engagement in the world. But it's that there's this dialectic that must always, animate the Christian imagination. This dialectic defined by the turning from the phraseological to the real, that those are ultimately, a mutually enriching energies and convictions. Mm-hmm. And I think that, while you're right, there are these multiple Bonhoeffers and different people try to retrieve Bonhoeffer for different purposes. I think that we can observe profound continuities in his thought, and that at the end of the day, if we, kind of release our own claims on Bonhoeffer, what emerges in the end is kind of strange and unfamiliar, exceedingly, generative. It's an exemplar of a way of following Christ in this kind of post-metaphysical world, this world beyond Christendom, this time after the collapse of religion. It's less, a kind of prescriptive description, a prescriptive kind of account, than an invitation to embark on our own individual and communal journeys towards reality.
Yeah.
I think that there's a profound connection in Bonhoeffer's thought between Christ and reality. That the meaning of reality, reality, is through this journey with Christ into consummate humanness and into the polyphony and multidimensionality of the world. And, I should add that journey involves a lot of very beautiful historic practices of prayer and intercession and scriptural reading and, life together and, being in community and in a joyful and grateful kind of response. So I want to say that, while that's the shape, the content is very recognizable. I mean, Bonhoeffer is a man of who after 1932 falls in love with the Bible, falls in love with the Sermon on the Mount. And, his friendship with Eberhard, which was a fascinating friendship, was one that finally clusters around their shared devotion to Jesus and shared practice of contemplative disciplines and love of music and, a kind of resplendent, and joyful, Christian, Christian kind of existence, if you will.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that comes out in your text is just how much ongoing conversations with friends shape and impact his own theology, but also his own biography. Like, he makes decisions and lets his friends speak into his understanding of God and what it means for him to be a faithful follower of Jesus. And I picked 4 of them because I know that a lot of listeners of the podcast are theology nerds, and so I thought this would be a fun way of getting at kind of the relationships that shaped the course of Bonhoeffer's thought. And so you can take it wherever you want for each one, say as little or as much, but I would like to hear kind of like how Bonhoeffer understood them when in their relationship began, and then kind of how it morphed, changed, and impact things through it. And the first one is is his German liberal masterful neighbors. Right, like you tell this beautiful story. Like, he decides to be a theologian. His family thinks it's weird. Then he sets out as a personal mission to make theology, reasonable, legitimate, and acceptable again in the academy and that kind of thing. But he's next door neighbors to, isn't it, Von Harnack?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And this is absolutely right. He he is a child of the Berlin Bildungsbürgertum, the educated upper middle class, and of a a part of Berlin, a neighborhood called the Grunewald, which is really the place where the intellectual and artistic and corporate elites lived. And this is a home, his home, the Bonhoeffer home, where conversation and intellectual inquiry and the courage to, ask and to cross boundaries, and a kind of nurturing of the provenance of openness to other ideas and new ideas and unfamiliar ideas is, really part of the air that the Bonhoeffer family breathed, and so he managed through his through his erudition and his sort of manners and his elegance to complete not one but two doctorates in this faculty that had earned the reputation as being the most important center of liberal Protestantism, not only in Germany but in Western Europe, and at the same time to strike a kind of Barthian tone among a theological faculty that was no friend of Karl Barth. I mean, Karl Barth had studied in Berlin himself, but by the 1920s, Harnack and others were digging in their heels and calling the kind of Barthian revolution, a withdrawal into some sort of, anti-intellectual fideism, which it's not, of course, but then nonetheless, these lines were drawn. Bonhoeffer, in sort of his research on his first dissertation and then through more serious reading on the second dissertation, finds Barth, he's blown away by Barth. He reads Word of God, Word of Man, the commentary on the Romans, and he somehow, through his remarkable synthetic, imagination, is able to bring together both the concreteness and the experiential energies of the liberal tradition within a framework that is decidedly Barthian, that really understands that Christian faith and practice is premised on the prevenient decision of God to reveal God's self in Jesus Christ and establish this new social order, the church, our being in Christ. He's able to pull off the impossible, to work creatively with Barth and brilliantly with Barth in his dissertations in a faculty that loathed Barth.
Well, I was fascinated by this, and I have always liked Bonhoeffer better than Barth, but for someone that hangs out in Claremont, that's not wonderfully surprising. But I wonder if it's not the way he was able to do it was he gave such a better reading of Kant in his first dissertation that he engages Kant and is able to articulate a way of being a realist about God and divine action while also engaging in both the first two critiques. And when classically liberal theologians tended to take Kant as a compromise, as a way of kind of preserving religious and theological discourse by giving philosophy the ability to tell it, don't talk about God and these types of things, but take ethics or take this.
Right.
Do you know if he how did he see his philosophical moves early on related to his kind of growing love and then critique and pushback to Barth?
Yeah, it's a great question. Bonhoeffer stands in the company of such Jewish thinkers as Buber and Levinas and Scholem and Rosenzweig. Though he had only read or only knew of Buber's I and Thou, he had not read these other sources and appears not to have known anything about the Frankfurt School and all of the extraordinary kind of energies and intellectual creativity there. But it's but he shares the general critique of the 19th century German philosophical tradition and concern about the final kind of reduction of the ideas of God, world, and self to the ego, to the I think, to the transcendental unity of apperception, and recognizes the extent to which God as righteous, holy, transcendent, prevenient in grace and judgment is eclipsed by the kind of reduction that the tradition makes to thinking about God, finally on the basis of some mode or modulation of human experience, be that moral or aesthetic or affective, as in Schleiermacher's feelings of absolute dependence and the like. And so the question is how does a philosophical theologian escape from this finally totalizing system in which all reality is kind of enfolded in the logic of the thinking self. And so he appeals to the discourse of dialogue and the social relation and the way in which ultimately the philosophical aporias of modernity can be resolved only in a kind of relational dynamic, and in Bonhoeffer's own account, in the being of Christians in the church, in this kind of, as Bonhoeffer says, Christus als Gemeinde existieren, Christ existing as community. And so I think that Act and Being, his second dissertation, is without a doubt the most underappreciated theological work of the 20th century. It is a genius work that Bonhoeffer himself shortly kind of disowned, or he didn't so much disagree with it. He just kind of got he felt weary by a kind of complete immersion in the idiolectic, of the Kantian, Hegelian, Heideggerian tradition. But Bonhoeffer's responses to Heidegger as well are stunning. A decade or years before Heidegger, becomes the zealous Nazi-appointed rector of Freiburg, he or is it Marburg? I'm forgetting suddenly.
Well, I think Heidegger's at Marburg.
Yeah, Bonhoeffer has a 12-page account of being in time that is a masterful kind of Christological deconstruction of Heidegger's fundamental ontology on the basis that he has not at all, on the claim that Heidegger has not at all escaped from the totalizing compulsions of the 19th century, but in fact, being towards death is finally a claim of that being towards death is finally so radically individualizing that in the end, community, relationships with others, the social existence, these all become marginalized as part of the everyday world of das Man, of inauthenticity. And in the end, one has, a kind of a epochal, heroic, Dasein unleashed in the world that is lacking, ethical and political content, and awaiting, a kind of call, or one might say, a kind of Führer principle to give it substance. But nonetheless, Heidegger, rather than representing some kind of alternative to modernity, is really the kind of exemplification of its final exhaustion and its profound vulnerability to political tyranny and to oppressive dictatorships.
Mm-hmm. In that actual kind of engagement with Heidegger connects with one of the questions I had about a Bonhoeffer and Barth's relationship, who, and you can say something about it and then just talk about him and Barth's relationship. But I wonder if Bonhoeffer's philosophical engagement early on with Kant and Heidegger and Hegel doesn't keep him from dismissing completely the kind of anthropological religiosity
Absolutely.
of human beings. Not in
Absolutely.
the sense that religion socially or whatever is, he shares the critique of the idolatrous function of religion, but he doesn't go with Barth to say that, short of God showing up,
Right.
like God makes you religious and then gives you religion in a sense.
It's absolutely right. Bonhoeffer understands the situatedness of all theological thinking in a particular historical narrative, and he doesn't pretend that it's possible to somehow be deracinated from that and some kind of magical revelational sort of Deus ex machina almost, but that he he's very committed to the extent to which the incarnation, just to go back to what needs to be remembered in Bonhoeffer's thinking, is a moment of an event in which the disparate aspects of the world are woven together in this detailed cosmic integration. And Bonhoeffer's not afraid of that language. Mm-hmm. He's not afraid of talking about the anthropological integrity of human being. He's not afraid of talking about the historical situatedness of the influence of social and political networks, and he's not at all sort of Barthian in that sense. And in fact, his one encounter with Barth after he returned from his visit to the United States in 1931, he went and spent a few weeks with Barth and attended his seminar. It was a very interesting exchange. He loved Barth. He said Barth the man is even better than his books. But finally felt like a theological bastard. This is what he said, and he even used the imagery of African Americans in the Jim Crow South to exemplify how he felt among the Barthians. And he said, I feel almost like an African American being inspected by some white supremacist sheriff, to see and to interrogate, my authenticity and my integrity and, my identity. And their relationship is fascinating. And it's one that I sort of carry all the way through the book. And Bonhoeffer admired Barth and read everything he could get, and read galleys of Tutu in prison. Mm-hmm. But he didn't want a mentor, and Bonhoeffer wasn't looking for a wise old man to be his sort of guide and authority. He had a native distrust of authority, for one thing, and this is one of the dispositions that served him so well, in the 30s. Barth, however, thought that it was his mission to make Bonhoeffer into one of the chosen. And he was never reluctant to shower advice or praise or more often kind of criticism or veiled criticism to Bonhoeffer. And Bonhoeffer would listen politely and often not even do the very opposite of what Barth admonished. But it's an extraordinarily important relationship, and it's one of the little sort of sideshows that one finds throughout Strange Glory.
Well, one of the cool things about having an attraction to Barth and him not thinking you're Barthian enough, it means like you end up in the company of Bonhoeffer and Pannenberg, which seems
that's
like
that's right.
Pannenberg said I'm a peculiar Barthian, and then Barth was not too thrilled with it. So,
absolutely. And I do think, and when I look at sort of post-war German theologians, Pannenberg and even more Moltmann strike me as standing in a very sort of creative and generative continuity with Bonhoeffer.
Well, Pannenberg would have to fix his politics.
Yes, right. Well, but Moltmann, I think Moltmann is a theologian I read and continue to read and teach, and strikes me in the full breadth of his imagination, honoring Bonhoeffer's legacy like no other post-war theologian I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at AAR this year, when we do the podcast live at AAR each year, we're interviewing Moltmann for the podcast. So he is super excited.
He is a princely fellow, and in his early 80s, as vital as ever. So I look forward to hearing that.
Well, the key is just not to start tearing up in the middle of it and go like, I've dreamed about talking to you after reading your books.
I know. I know.
So,
well, if you find yourself in Tübingen, he's always eager to open his door for coffee or a beer or a glass of wine. I shouldn't say this for him, of course, but it's been my experience that students who've made the pilgrimage over have always been welcomed warmly by Professor Moltmann.
Mm-hmm. So talk about his relationship to Reinhold Niebuhr, and I'm asking it because I'm from North Carolina, and before I came out there, I went to Wake Forest University's Divinity School,
Great school.
for the sheer purpose of I can never do anything with Duke, right? Like North Carolina basketball requires me to despise all things Duke, which may have given me a predilection to just disregard anything Stanley Hauerwas has to say about Bonhoeffer,
right?
Because I know that that he has his own version of Bonhoeffer, and I have hard ears to hear. Like once he's no longer associated with the Blue Devils, I'm sure I'll appreciate his books in a different way.
Well, he's got a gig at Aberdeen now, so maybe that will inspire a new consideration. But I think that's an important question, and honestly, Niebuhr's influence was as profound, if not more so, on Bonhoeffer than Karl Barth. And I really wanted to reclaim those Niebuhrian resonances in Bonhoeffer. They met each other in 1930, and Bonhoeffer was not initially impressed. But I have to say, Reinhold Niebuhr wasn't particularly impressed with Bonhoeffer either. And on a term paper that Bonhoeffer submitted to Niebuhr in the fall of 1930 at Union, a term paper on the Lutheran doctrine of justification, which was a fairly straightforward account of justification by faith. Niebuhr had some very critical words in the margin of the manuscript, and challenged Bonhoeffer directly to reckon more honestly and more fully with the ethical application, with the ethical consequences of justification. And Niebuhr said, justification, as you describe it here, is too abstract. It is too otherworldly. That unless justification has an essential connection with the ethical dimension, it remains a kind of sterile formulation. And, Bonhoeffer fought back, and he offered his own unkind words or critical words of Niebuhr. But their friendship was sealed and was an important one over the years. And I would like to say that when you hear Bonhoeffer after 1933 say that a discipleship without obedience is cheap grace, you're hearing the Niebuhrian voice. You're hearing this exchange with Niebuhr on the importance of understanding the social concreteness of justification, and some of that, of course, was in the Berlin faculty as well, no doubt. But I would also say that when Bonhoeffer, towards the late 1930s, begins to move in this sort of complicated way from the church struggle into the political conspiracy, and to, in fact, accept his brother-in-law Hans von Dohnanyi's invitation to take part in one of the assassination attempts on Hitler, Bonhoeffer begins speaking in ethics and other places about the importance of responsibility. And responsibility becomes an obsessive thematics in those late years, to the point at which one has to understand that the kind of realistic considerations of how Christians must respond to tyranny and oppression and dictatorship and brutality is shaped by a sense of Niebuhrian realism. And I would suggest that I would claim, I think it's demonstrable, I think I show it in the book, that his decision to join the conspiracy was finally shaped by those kinds of Niebuhrian themes that Bonhoeffer struggled against, but learned from, and that finally enabled him to say, one will be a sinner if one doesn't join the conspiracy and is complicit in the continued Nazi brutalities against Jews and non-Aryans. One will be a sinner if one joins the conspiracy and attempts to take a human life, even one as monstrous as Hitler's. And so now it's about thinking responsibly in relation to to human suffering and to discrete ways of relieving human suffering, as well as, he said often, in sort of a way that resembles Hans Jonas's later work, thinking in terms of the coming generation, thinking responsibly about the present moment in terms of the future. So, yeah, Niebuhr, very important. More important than I think we've ever realized in our understanding of Bonhoeffer.
Yeah, I mean it definitely shows up unexpectedly in the biography. And the other thing that does, and I'm only bringing it up now because I was like kind of irritated after reading the book and then looking online that it seemed like everyone was just obsessed with either you ruining Bonhoeffer by making him gay, or now he's the new figurehead for the leftist agenda or something.
Yeah.
And when you read the book, I'm sitting there reading it and I was like, that actually just sounds like where is the hidden agenda? Is it in footnotes that I didn't read, or what? So maybe you could just tell me one about his friendship with Eberhard, and then also have you gone nuts with just how crazy people have responded?
No, I haven't. I think, in fact, if anything, I am just exceedingly grateful for the generous critical attention the book has garnered, and by a very charitable reading by my fellow evangelicals. I have to say, I was honored and surprised by the award of the Christianity Today Book Prize. And I think it says something important and, to me, very moving about the kinds of the new convictions or emerging new kind of perspectives on the world that much of the subculture has. I certainly didn't want to offer some kind of some kind of a response to the biography by Eric Metaxas by constructing a left-wing Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer is, in fact, fairly conservative politically. His social ethics, if you will, at the end of the day, resemble those of John Paul II on issues of life and the integrity of all created life. He's a bit of a dandy and unapologetic about his vast erudition. His older brothers took a more kind of left-leaning tack, but they always were a bit surprised and annoyed by what they discerned, I think, mistakenly, as a kind of apolitical impulse in Bonhoeffer. I don't think that's the case at all. But I wanted to make him beautiful and strange, and to capture Bonhoeffer in his own kind of grandeur and particularity, eccentricity. And the relationship with Eberhard was very much a part of my own kind of authorial commitment to honesty. The homoerotic quality of that relationship has been discussed kind of off screen for decades. I periodically attend the International Bonhoeffer Congresses. They're every 4 years, and cities that were important to Bonhoeffer, and these have come up. This question has come up. There are members of the Bonhoeffer Guild who think that Bonhoeffer was gay. I don't say that. I honestly don't have any kind of a adequate description of his sexual identity. What is clear is that he was romantically attracted to Eberhard, and this attraction and the story of his relationship to Eberhard and his longing for some kind of a spiritual marriage with Eberhard, one finds in all these new letters that are available, and they're beautiful and finally heartbreaking letters. And I wanted to render that relationship in all of its fullness and beauty. I think it is a gorgeous story, and finally one that's sad and tender, and finally, enables a kind of a renewed friendship in the final months of Bonhoeffer's life. But Bonhoeffer loved Eberhard, and his affections for Eberhard and his expectation that Eberhard might join him in this kind of spiritual marriage where the two would live as they did for 6 or 7 years, sharing a bank account, giving Christmas presents as a couple, traveling everywhere together, would be somehow consecrated in a fashion that would enable them to live together, and journey through life together. And Eberhard was not finally willing or interested in reciprocating the intensity of Bonhoeffer's affection or that particular expectation. But this relationship one has to be honest and look at the letters that were exchanged, and particularly Bonhoeffer's letters to Eberhard in 1940-41, which are these beautiful love letters that could be published in a volume, love letters from Bonhoeffer to Eberhard, Dietrich to Eberhard. It's a relationship that is both homoerotic and celibate. And so obviously when I'm working in the years that it took to write this book and taking so much time to craft this relationship, I finally think, oh my God, I'm just going to this was just going to offend everybody. Everybody's going to be, angry at this portrayal. Because, proponents of same-sex unions and Christian gays and lesbians will say, well, he was gay, but, he didn't consummate it physically. And so that puts us back in, kind of an old conflictual place. And then, evangelicals and conservatives would be outraged because I honestly explore Bonhoeffer's homoerotic attraction to Eberhard. It was a relationship that was defined by their shared, or I should say, it was centered around their shared devotion to Jesus and their and to spiritual practices and to prayer and to Bible study and to all of the challenges and joys and difficulties of the pastorate. But it was also one that was celibate. And so that is the particular portrait of Bonhoeffer and Eberhard that seems to me, on the basis of the letters and the historical evidence, indisputable, beautiful, strange, and ultimately glorious.